I have a confession to make. Sometimes I eat too many scoops of ice cream. And sometimes, if I'm in a state of emotional eating, I gorge out on potato salad. Don't ask me why. Sometimes, if there's a 30-second lull in time, I automatically pick up my phone and start scrolling through social media. Because why not? Sometimes I come across cute clothes online and then, without even thinking, it ends up in my metaphorical cart and I click buy now. And what do you know? I've purchased another pair of jeans or something. Sometimes I click on that article that's called How to Get a Six-Pack in 7 Days and think that maybe I too could become like a model in ads in an instant. Sometimes I opt for instant gratification because it feels good and right in the moment, and I don't ever stop to think about the implications of my impulses. And sometimes, or oftentimes, I wish I had exercised delayed gratification rather than making that impulsive decision to instantly meet what I thought was a need. And sometimes, maybe I'm not the only one. Have you ever heard of the term instant gratification? Or in contrast, delayed gratification? Or maybe you've seen the Marshmallow Experiment that helps explain these concepts perfectly. So in the Marshmallow Experiment, experimenters brought in a variety of kids, and one by one they would bring them into this private room and sit them at a table. And then they would place a marshmallow directly in front of them and say, okay, I'm gonna leave now for a few minutes. If you don't eat the marshmallow, when I come back, I'll give you a second marshmallow. And then they leave the room. And the footage, if you've ever seen the video of what happened in this experiment, it can be quite comical. Some kids are like so focused on this marshmallow and you can tell that in their minds they're thinking, don't eat it because you can get a second one, but they really just want to eat it because it's right there. And other kids are poking at it and thinking like, maybe if I touch it enough, it'll make it feel like I'm eating it or something. And some kids didn't really have much of a care. And then you have the classic kids where they just take the marshmallow and eat it. And this is a perfect example of instant versus delayed gratification. So the kids who ate the marshmallow right away were exercising instant gratification. The need inside of them to eat the marshmallow was so strong that they didn't even care about the fact that there was a second marshmallow. They just ate it. Whereas the kids who waited, though it may have been very painful for them, they were exercising delayed gratification because they knew that something better was coming and they were willing to go through the momentary discomfort of waiting to get this second reward. And we all sometimes have these metaphorical marshmallows that are placed in front of us, and we have a choice of whether or not we're going to eat it and satisfy that desire right away, or wait a little bit longer, knowing or hoping that something better will come later. There are a ton of different ways that this can play out, and I named a bunch in my confession of things that I have totally fallen for before. There's things about how we eat, because sometimes the chocolate brownie ice cream is just right in front of us and we just have to eat it. It's just too much to handle, at least for me. It's also about how we spend our downtime. Do we automatically just pick up our phones and start scrolling through social media or binge watching on Netflix because those are great methods to distract ourselves from having to have a conversation or having to sit in our own thoughts. It's also about how we spend our money. Are we so quick to click for online shopping and just buy? Or do we stop ourselves and ask the question of, do I actually need this? It's also about how we view our bodies. Are we gonna fall for the quick step method to become like the models in ads and get like the quote unquote perfect body? Or are we willing just to maintain a healthy lifestyle? It's also about how we have conversations. Sometimes the easier thing is to just give our opinion because it makes us feel good about ourselves in the moment. But the harder thing is to delay giving our opinion to actually listen to what another person has to say. So we all have these desires and cravings and longings and things that inside of us that come up that we feel like we have to meet that need right away because it almost feels like survival, like we just have to meet it in that instant. But sometimes that momentary discomfort, it can feel like too much, but we really just have to learn to push through it just a little bit longer. But sometimes we get a little bit overwhelmed by the feeling inside of us. Let me start off by saying this. Instant gratification is not a quote-unquote millennial problem or something that only Gen Zers are susceptible to, though many may claim it could be that way. Sure, millennials did coin the term YOLO, which means you only live once, basically giving permission to do whatever you want, whenever you want, because you only live once, so why wait? Do it now. But in fact, instant gratification is actually a human thing. So human, in fact, that we're going to look at a story in the very first book of the Bible, in Genesis, and see that somebody in Genesis did fall for the instant gratification trap. But before we go there, I want to unpack instant gratification just a little bit longer. And basically, the term just describes that you want what you want, like right then. You feel this thing and you're like, I need it right now. Not in 5 minutes from now, I need it right now. I need to gratify that need. It's like you're craving salty French fries. You may as well just grab your wallet right now and get to McDonald's so that you can fulfill that need. But to instantly gratify a need isn't always bad. There are actually some really good ways that we can gratify needs and really positive things. For example, when our stomachs start to rumble, that's a pretty positive sign that our bodies are saying, I need food for survival, please feed me. And then we should probably act on that pretty quickly. Or as a non-food example, sometimes we might be working on a project and you work so hard on it and you really just need to hear instant feedback from someone saying how you did so that you can go forward with a little bit of clarity and insight. Or things as simple as getting a thank you for holding the door open for someone. That instant feedback of being told that they're thanked is a positive reinforcement that what you just did was a good thing. Or finally, for another example, is sometimes we have really hard days and we just need to vent it out. The worst thing to do on those days is to delay that and to hold it in and let it bubble and stir and burn inside of us. The better thing to do is to instantly get it on the table to a trusted friend or family member and just get it out because we need to relieve that inner tension just a little bit. So these instant responses are positive. And like most things in life, there are positives and there are negatives. And the negatives are what can get us into a lot of trouble. For example, excessive online shopping can cause a lot of financial stress. Or turning to pornography to relieve a sexual desire can cause a lot of relational and intimacy pain. Or pushing yourself in terms of to get a recognition or a promotion at work can actually result in a decrease of respect from others and a decrease in opportunity. Or another one that I've seen a lot of is that if people are out with friends or family for dinner and there's a 30-second lull in the conversation, rather than pushing through the discomfort to figure out what to say next, everyone just reaches for their phones and starts scrolling. And that causes a lot of damage in terms of social interactions. So in all of these cases, there's a moment of discomfort and there's a moment of pain and there's a moment of longing and a craving. And rather than pushing through it, we try to turn to something to relieve that pain instantly. And that is instant gratification. Because it feels like in that moment, if we don't meet that need right away, we're going to crumble. So we do everything in our power to try and fulfill that need and find satisfaction. So let's jump back to the very first book of the Bible in Genesis and realize that meeting instant gratification needs is actually a human problem, not just a generational thing. So there's this man named Abraham, who was called Abram at the time, and he was married to Sarah, who was called Sarai at the time. And I'm sure they had a lovely marriage. They had no children, but they took in Abram's nephew Lot and kind of lived life that way. But they had no children. And one day, God took Abram aside and said, Abram, I'm going to make you the father of many nations. Now, I'm not sure if you've clued into the fact, but to be a father of many nations kind of implies that there are children to carry on the family line. And if Abram and Sarah were in their 20s or 30s, this wouldn't seem far off. It could happen, but they're like retirement age by now. And the thought of having children was pretty much off the table. But Abram didn't write off the promise from God right away. In his curiosity, he boldly asked God, he said, how is this even going to happen? Like, this seems very impossible. Is it going to come through one of my relatives, or how is this going to work? So in Genesis 15, verse 4-5, it says, Then the Lord said to him, No, your servant will be your heir, for you will have a son of your own who will be your heir. Then the Lord took Abram outside and said to him, Look up at the sky and count the stars if you can. That's how many descendants you will have. Have you ever looked at the night sky? Especially if you're like up north in northern Ontario, where the stars are just numerous. You look up and you can't even try to count because there are so many stars. So Abram is doing this and he's looking up and realizing he can't count the number of stars, but then he looks at his descendants and realizes there's 0. And I'm no mathematician, but those numbers don't add up. An impossible number to count versus 0, they don't quite line up. Now imagine then Abram going home to his wife Sarai and saying, hey, we're going to have a son. Yay! I'm not sure how this is going to happen. This seems very impossible, but this is what God told me. And I'm sure that there were some questions and wonderings, and Sarah was like, but there was probably something inside of her that was excited about the prospect. And this maternal instinct that was just excited about having a child that would come from her own DNA, a child that she could raise and care for and nurture and raise up. And even though the whole thing seemed impossible, she still was kind of excited about it. So God promises a child, so you would think that in 9 months from now, Sarai would be holding a child in her arms, right? Wrong. It was years later, waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting for this promised child. And you might be thinking, how does waiting have to do with instant gratification? Stick with me. So Sarah obviously had no control over getting pregnant. It's not something that you can do out of sheer willpower. But she did know that there was a promise. She knew that. She knew that God had promised them a child. But her focal point wasn't on the promise. Her focal point was on having a child. And so she stewed in it for years, and day after day after day after day, she thought about, maybe today's the day. How do I have a child? Da, 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 da. And she stewed in it for years. And one day she cracked, and the inner discomfort that she was feeling and the inner wrestling that she was feeling all of a sudden was just so strong and unbearable that she made this impulsive decision because it probably felt like the only thing she could do to survive. So in Genesis 16, verse 1-2, it says, Now Sarai, Abram's wife, had not been able to bear children for him, but she had an Egyptian servant named Hagar. So Sarai said to Abram, The Lord has prevented me from having children. Go and sleep with my servant. Perhaps I can have children through her. She had to gratify the need. She had to. She could no longer trust the promise. And she could no longer trust that God's plan was bigger or that God would even help her to manage the weight. And in an effort to curb the urge and the craving and the longing to have a child, she took things into her own hands and she kind of just lost focus of everything else. Have a child with a slave, she told her husband. Just do that. I need something. She had convinced herself that nothing else mattered. And this seemed like a quick fix to the problem, and like if I can get a child through my servant at least, then nothing else will matter and I will be fully satisfied. Hindsight is 2020. When Sarah took things into her own hands, things went south, like more south than they felt at that time. Her impulsive decision actually caused more trouble. In Genesis chapter 16, verse 4, it talks about how when Sarah found out that Hagar was pregnant, she began to despise her mistress. And then she goes on to blame her husband for her misery. She couldn't own up to the fact that she made a poor decision. It was just a complete and total mess because she had convinced herself that finding a way to meet that inner need and inner longing would bring her the inner peace and satisfaction that she so longed for. But in reality, it brought more trouble and drama and relational misery. She had become so distracted that she forgot about the long-term plan, the promise that she would have a child. That was a guarantee that she would have a child. God promised that, and a promise from God means a promise that won't be broken. But a promise from God doesn't necessarily mean it happens on human timing and in a human way. And Sarah forgot that. She was so focused on the inner desire. And the things that we focus on tend to be the biggest thing in our minds. It becomes the stronger muscle because it's so much in our focal point. So if you think about your eyes and think about where you're looking right now, you can't see everything. Not everything is there. And everything that you do see, not all of it's in focus. There's only a small part of what you're seeing that is in complete focus. But you have a say and a choice over where your eyes are looking and what you're actually going to be focusing on. So if you think about the kids with the marshmallows in the experiment, some of those kids literally couldn't take their eyes off the marshmallow. It was all they could think about, all they could focus on. There could have been amazing toys in the room, but that didn't matter because they wouldn't have even noticed it because they were so focused on the marshmallow in front of them. They couldn't fix their gaze on anything else. And as a personal example, if I'm being completely honest, so I've only fasted once for spiritual reasons. And I decided I would fast for 24 hours, but I didn't even make it the full 24 hours. My focal point was just on this story of, I can't eat. I'm so hungry. My head hurts. Only a couple more hours until I can eat. And that's all I could think about. I couldn't get my focus anywhere else on the bigger reason as to why I had even chosen to fast at that particular day. And then at about 19 or 20 hours, and I caved and I actually ate food, and I never even made it because my focus was so strong on the fact I couldn't eat. So the things that we focus on have power over our minds and power over what we do. And if we're so much focusing on the things that we desperately crave and the things that we desperately want, we can quickly lose focus of what actually matters, or the reason as to why we need to delay the thing that we're so desperately wanting. That's what Sarah did. She was so focused. She forgot about the promise. She forgot about the bigger picture and that something better was coming. So Sarah impulsively acted, and pretty soon there are 2 little boys running around. One from Hagar, the servant, and one from Sarah. And because of Sarah's decision to take things into her own hands, and because of the misery that she was feeling and the blame she put on other people, everything was a mess. Everything was a complete mess. And it was because of her choice to remain focused on what she didn't have rather than what she did have, and that caused so much pain for her family. Her decision had this ripple effect. It didn't just impact her, it impacted everybody around her. And not just that, it revealed Sarah's lack of trust in God. She had the guaranteed promise, but she couldn't hold to that trust. She couldn't hold to the fact that God can meet our needs in the wait, and He can help you have patience in the wait. And He's the one who never breaks a promise. He always holds to it. And He's the one who always has a better future in mind. But she forgot all of that. But holding to those truths takes work. It's like working a muscle, and it can be painful at times. It takes more intentional effort and sometimes more faith in God, because it's so much harder to delay than to just give in to what we want. Now today, as you've been listening, you might be thinking about a decision that you made that you wish that you hadn't, based off of impulse, based off of a need to instantly gratify a need or a desire, and you're thinking that you're doomed. You messed up. And I want to derail that freight train real fast, because I know that it's picking up speed. The number of times for me that I can think about, oh, I wish I had said this differently or done this differently. I wish I hadn't given into instant gratification. I wish I had just delayed a little bit longer because I knew something better was coming. The number of times I can think is probably as numerous as the stars in the sky. But there's so much that we can learn from this, and I want to encourage us today with 2 things. One, let's learn from these. Let's learn from these moments. If hindsight is 20/20, then there are things to learn. Rather than just pushing it down and letting shame bubble up, or pretending that it never happened and just moving forward, pretending that it didn't happen, there are things that we can learn, and we can go forward with wisdom. And the more that we exercise the muscle of noticing these moments, of noticing when, oh, I'm trying to instantly gratify a need when I should probably delay, or noticing that you're behaving in a way that you probably shouldn't, the more that we exercise that muscle, the easier it is to redirect and do something we know we won't regret. Or we could be like Sarah. Sarah didn't do this. She didn't reflect. She didn't admit that what she did was wrong. Rather, she stewed in it, and then she pointed fingers. She blamed and had a miserable relationship with Hagar, her servant, and then she blamed her husband, Abraham, for her misery, because she didn't choose to learn from it. So she ended up having a miserable time and made other people's lives miserable as well. But the second thing that we can learn from that is that God is way bigger than we could ever imagine. Way bigger. And God is not intimidated or overwhelmed by the moments that we do give into our humanness, and that we do something we know we shouldn't, or behave out of reaction rather than being proactive. He's not intimidated by any of this or scared of it. He knows that it's going to happen. He knows that from the beginning of time. But His grace is always right there for us to receive, and all we have to do is just take it and accept it. That's it. He just puts it right in front of us. And what's amazing is that Sarah's decision still didn't write off the covenant or the promise that God was giving Abraham. God still told Abraham, this covenant and this promise that I'm making is going to come through you and come through your descendants. It's going to go through Isaac. That is not changing because of this decision that Sarah made. And what's even crazier, because God is way bigger than we could ever imagine, is that he still blesses Sarah. He still blesses her and says that she is going to be the mother of these kings that are going to come. The mother. He says, Sarah, just because you made a mistake, I'm not going to write you off. I still am going to bless you and make you the mother of this nation. And then what's even crazier is that God blesses Ishmael. And Ishmael is the son born to Hagar, the servant. And God, in his mightiness and in his abundance, he still blesses Ishmael. Even though it was part of Sarah's mistake in going to Hagar, God still blesses him. Because God is way bigger. He doesn't write people off because of their mistakes. Sure, life wasn't going to be easy because of some of these decisions that were made, but God's plan always prevails, and God's love is always bigger. Sure, sometimes in God's plan, us as humans put massive hiccups in the moments, and God has to maneuver all of those, but he's not scared of that. He's not intimidated by it, and his plan is always bigger, and it's always better, and he's always going to win. So if you're thinking right now about a moment in your life that you wish that you hadn't done, and the shame might be bubbling up inside of you right now, I need you to get that freight train off the track. Like, get it off real fast. Because God doesn't write you off. He doesn't write us off for mistakes that we made. He should have written Sarah off, but God is bigger, and he didn't write her off, and he still had a plan, and he still blessed her. But in these moments when that does happen, there are lessons that we can learn, 100%. But we can also go to God because he is way bigger than our mistake. And he already knows. Rather than pulling a Sarah and stewing in it and pointing fingers for blame and becoming miserable in our relationships because we know that we made a mistake, rather than doing that, go to God because he is the one who brings ultimate freedom. Sarah became a prisoner to herself. If we stew in these things, or if we kick ourselves for these things, we become a prisoner to ourselves. But God doesn't want that. He wants us to find freedom in him. So remember today that when there are lessons to learn, hindsight is 20/20, 100%. But God is way bigger, and his plan will always prevail, and all we have to do is just go to him.